How do you get your arms around a problem and a challenge as huge as trying to improve our culture of food in the United States?
You know, a lot of it, I think, is getting rid of the taboos.
What are the taboos?
The taboos are that people don't really talk about it. They don't talk about the poisons are in our environment, and there were vested interests that didn't want us to talk about them for a long time. It's hard to go on for a long time. I've been talking about this stuff for many years, and I was unwelcome on television networks because so much of the advertising is coming from that.
You actually did directly find that out? Like they were keeping you off?
Many times.
It was the food industry keeping you off.
Well, yeah, and pharmaceutical industry. I mean, I've taken on a lot of big titans, and who are also happen to be the biggest advertisers, and so part of it is there's that, and there's also in the scientific community a taboo. There's the people who get funded, or the people who are creating science that is not critical of those very powerful special interests.
So now, these same people, you said pharma and the food industry, who've been keeping you off TV, are they reaching out to you? Are you able to communicate with them? How do you get them inside the tent? What changed?
I got President Trump named me as Health and Human Services, so they know that the change is coming. And these people are not bad people. They're people who are responding to incentives, to built-in incentives that are perverse.
Like what? What are the incentives you want them to be responding to?
The incentives that I want them to be responding to is the final goal is to have the healthiest country in the world, which we used to have. Today we're the sickest country in the world, and we're the sickest country in the world not because there's bad people, but because there's perverse incentives. There's perverse incentives in the agricultural industry that concentrate these huge subsidies on commodity crops. So we're producing huge amount of corn, row crop farming that is very pesticide and chemical intensive. And the industry itself, the processed food industry, has figured out all these ways to make food addictive without making it nutritious. So we're addicted to the taste, and they have synthesized the taste. And but there's no nutrients in the food. So we're just getting bad food that's loaded with chemicals, a lot of them created in the laboratory that our bodies were not designed to metabolize.
Why start here in the indigenous community?
Well, when I came in as HHS secretary, I said one of my top priorities is going to be reforming the Indian health services.
And you've been involved in this community for
I've
decades,
been involved
right?
20% of my professional career as an environmental lawyer was representing the tribes. And my father was deeply interested in this issue. My uncle Ted Kennedy, my uncle Jack Kennedy, were all very, very interested in what was happening in the tribes. They thought America was the greatest nation in the world, but that we could not live up to our moral authority in the world as the exemplary nation until we first went back and remediated the initial crime, the kind of birth crime, the original sin of the American experience, which was the treatment of the indigenous people of this hemisphere. And my father took us to all the reservations and saw this extraordinary poverty, saw people who were not integrated, who were not able to live the American dream. That they were, for a variety of reasons, their culture had been systematically destroyed. They had been moved to the worst, least productive lands. Their water had been taken, their resources had been taken, and they were relegated to these sort of dark corners of our society. And my father and uncles spent a lot of their careers trying to figure out pathways to bring Native Americans back into a place where they could actually take advantage of the America. They could experience the American dream like the rest of us can, and have hope for their futures, and have aspirations and ambitions. and ways to achieve those. And so I think that's a challenge that I've accepted. And I've said from the beginning that, I think I've visited the reservations in Indian country earlier and more often than any health secretary in history, and I'm going to continue to keep this as a priority.
Do you think that, for moral reasons that you described, we really need to spend more resources than we might otherwise to deal with, to take care of, to improve this community?
I mean, one of the
proportional to their population, for example.
Is, the good thing about this is it's a bipartisan issue. So you have Democrats and Republicans who feel a moral compulsion to do something for Native Americans. The bad news is that that Indian Health Service is chronically underfunded. And so there's a funding issue, but there's also an approach issue. And one of those, one of the solutions to this is more sovereignty. These are sovereign nations. They have unique relationships with the federal government. And since 1975, many of them have been taking advantage of the opportunity under the Sovereignty Act to take control of their own health. These health centers were initially operated by the federal government and owned. And today, more and more, the health centers are operated by natives, and they're operated much more efficiently. They're really models for what we should be doing across the United States.
So tell me what you saw today. You kind of lit up, I saw one moment when you were being told about all the things that were going on. What's your reaction to being here today?
It's really inspiring to me because this is an example of how to do it right. This is the example that we should be using in Indian country, everywhere in Indian country.
And can you scale this across the United States?
Well, that's what we're going to try to do. That's the challenge.
How do you do that?
I think the best way is to empower the Native people. I've been meeting with Indians since day one, and we, for the first time, have a senior advisor at HHS who is an Indian, and who will be part of every discussion on every issue. And a lot of it has to do with returning power to these communities because they want to help themselves.
Do you see empowering communities way beyond the indigenous community and expanding it to the entire United States?
I do.
Is this a model for that?
Well, yeah, we all have to start taking responsibility for our own health, and we need incentives. Right now, we have incentives in our health system that incentivize expenditures. So they compensate doctors for ordering more and more tests, and it's a misalignment. We need to realign the incentives so that it's outcome oriented, so that you get compensated if you're a physician for actually making somebody healthy rather than ordering a battery of tests. And that is, some of that is statutory changes, but and some of it we can do in HHS and in CMS. We're looking for every opportunity to do that, and I think that's what's going to reduce costs and make people healthier.
Have you mapped out a game plan? I would love to see it for doing that. Obviously, you're starting here. This is one of the first places, but have you mapped out a game plan for how this is going to expand and how are you going to roll out making America healthy again?
Yeah, we've mapped out a game plan.
Want to share it?
Well, it's multifaceted. I mean, there's hundreds of things that we have to do. And each of the agencies, NIH needs to have gold standard science and gold standard transparency. We need to replicate studies. We need to publish raw data. We need to get away from the traditional journals, which are controlled by the pharmaceutical industry, and create our own journals, which we're going to do.
You're going to create your own journals.
We're going to create our own journals.
How do you staff those? How do you vet them?
Well, we have that. We're going to do that. That's going to get done.
So these are the kind of specifics I think people really want to know. I want to know.
Yeah, I mean, that'll get done very quickly. And then FDA needs to start regulating food again and saying, not just when food is adulterated, when there's bacteria in it. Let's look at the chemicals in it. Let's stop using the GRAS standard, which we're abolishing, so that
generally regarded as safe.
Yeah, which is a standard that was when the FDA was first created. They were charged with regulating food and regulating additives to the food, chemical additives to the food. Congress wanted to allow them. There were some things that were just generally recognized as safe, foods that we'd been using for thousands of years, like yeast and flour and salt and sugar. And so so there was a category created called generally GRAS, or generally recognized as safe, to allow the use of those foods without new testing. But the industry captured the agency, and they began this process where every chemical additive is just automatically stamped, generally recognized as safe. That's why we have 10,000 additives in our food, in our country, and the Europeans only have 400 in theirs. Because in Europe, a chemical, before it's added to the food, has to be proven safe. In our country, it's just assumed to be safe until proven dangerous.
And supplements, right, are considered as food, and they're regulated as such.
Yeah.
So there's an issue there, right, with trying to figure out, well...
and I mean, our approach to that is that the supplement has to be what it says it is, and that's our job. That if it says it includes these ingredients, it better have those ingredients and not something else.
Then there are these claims like, probiotics will help your dog, and things like that, and maybe it's exactly what it says is in there, but it doesn't really do what it claims it's going to do.
Right, but I land where people ought to be able to make their own choices and their own assessments. And that the government's job is to make sure that what's in there is supposed to be in there, and maybe give warnings and say we don't believe that claim. Not to be ordering people not to be denying access to a nutrient that because what's happened, the impact is that the government that has been captured, these government agencies have been captured by the industry. So they use that power to deny access in order to increase the profit expectations of the industry rather than actually to protect public health. And we have to understand that dynamic of agency capture is real, it is active, and that we need to have a system that allows people, that respects people's intelligence, that respects people's rights to make their own choices and to make informed choices, and that we give them the best information. We make that available, but if you want to take it, you ought to be able to take it.
That's really interesting to me.
If you want a Coca-Cola, we know Coke is bad for you.
Right.
Okay, let me say that again. If you want a sugar soda drink, we know sugar soda drinks are bad for you.
Right.
We don't want to deny you the right to take them. You ought to have a right. We ought to maximize choices for people, but then tell them, be very transparent and very honest, and tell them that is going to poison you.
What's interesting about that for me is you're saying, okay, in terms of a public health role for the federal government, you're saying, look, we have access to a ton of information. We're going to look at the information. We're going to analyze it. We're going to say, we think actually this works, or it doesn't work, or there are some questions. The decision is yours, but here's our recommendation, right? So do you see you do see the federal government as saying, here's our recommendation?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. The government should be able to say, we don't recommend that you drink soda drinks. We don't recommend that you eat a lot of candy or donuts. If you want to do it, that's up to you. And the same thing should go for nutraceuticals, or for people who want to go see, alternative medicine, who want to do hyperbaric chambers, who want to do stem cells, who want to do chelation therapies. That all ought to be available here in the United States for people who want them. You're going to have quacks, you're going to have charlatans, and the federal government can keep their eye on that, and they can make recommendations, but it's got to be up to individual choice.
It's really interesting to me, and I know we're running out of time, but it's really interesting to me that you're saying that there is a role for the federal government to say, look, we're going to look at all the data. We have access to information you probably don't even have. And we're going to look at it all. We're going to talk to scientists.
We're going to post it all.
And you're going to post it all, and you say, and at the end of churning and compiling all this information, here's what we think. Now it's up to you what you do.
Exactly. That's the role that the government should have.
Anything else you want to say about this place?
I went through all of these different commodities, and I read the ingredients, and it's this is all made on all of these different grains are grown locally on Indian land. And all of them, none of them have seed oils in them, none of them have borate, none of them have titanium dioxide. None of them have any ingredients that you can't read.
I can't believe you were able to read these ingredients. How are your
I
eyes?
had to wear my glasses.
And you know what? Now, one ingredient is an ingredient that my grandmother would not recognize.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much
Thank you
for
very
the
much,
time.
Dr.
I really,
LaPook.
really appreciate it.